A routine first-class flight turned into a nightmare for Ethan Moore, the trailblazing CEO of Mindspan Technologies, when he lifted the lid on a mold-covered meal, an act that would spark a high-stakes conspiracy involving boardroom betrayals, corporate espionage, and a near-fatal allergic reaction. What happens when power players weaponize prejudice to sabotage a rival? Can one man's quiet determination and hidden recordings topple a coalition of corrupted executives and rogue airline staff? Imagine being trapped 30,000 feet in the air, alone and gasping for help, while the very people sworn to protect you conspire against your life and livelihood. Will Ethan make it past the security team waiting at the gate? Can he reach the emergency board meeting in time to save his company? And when all the evidence is laid bare, will any institution remain untouched by scandal? Join us as we unravel this breathtaking tale of courage, betrayal, and justice. If you believe in standing up against discrimination and exposing hidden corruption, hit like, share this video, and subscribe. Now, let's dive into the shocking story of when a contaminated meal almost ended a CEO's career. Ethan Moore sat rigidly in the polished first-class cabin, his dark eyes widening with disbelief as he lifted the cloche on his tray. Beneath it lay a hunk of mold-flecked sourdough and a slab of meat so putrid its edges curled like dead leaves. He had flown countless times as CEO of Mindspan Technologies, but never had he seen or smelled anything like this. As the only Asian American executive among the affluent board members on this flight, he had already endured whispered snickers and the occasional drip of spilled wine onto his bespoke suit. Yet this was something else entirely, a deliberate insult, disguised as a meal. Moments earlier, he had approached the service cart with steely calm. "Excuse me, there's something wrong with my dinner," he'd said, voice measured. The attendant, blonde, perfectly coiffed, had paused mid-smile. "Maybe you should stick to eating rice," she'd purred, her smirk sharper than the chef's knife she brandished. Laughter rippled through the cabin. Ethan closed his eyes, pressed record on his phone, and turned away, refusing to let them see him falter. He knew a storm was brewing, and he intended to document every drop of rain. Back in his glass-walled office in Riverbend City, the morning had begun with promise. At 39, Ethan Moore had built Mindspan from a two-person startup operating in his garage into a billion-dollar AI powerhouse. His presentation for the Global Innovation Summit in Hightower City promised to secure partnerships that would vault the company to the next level. Yet prejudice had shadowed him every step of the way, even in the corridors of his own headquarters. He remembered clearing his throat at the door when Jacob Foster strode in unannounced, the VP of Operations leaning his tall frame against the polished oak desk as though it belonged to him. "Got a minute?" Jacob Foster asked with that patronizing drawl. Though technically, reporting to Ethan, he never missed a chance to undermine his authority. Ethan kept his gaze fixed on the screen. "I'm finalizing slides for New York." Foster's smile sharpened. "About that, the board, and I think I should represent us at the summit instead. These old money investors might respond better to someone without an accent." Ethan paused, fingers hovering above the keyboard. "I don't have an accent," he replied evenly, "and I'm the CEO." Foster shrugged, as if stating the obvious, the son of immigrants could never be the face of leadership. When Aisha Patel arrived with travel documents, Ethan felt a momentary relief. "Everything's set, Mr. Moore," she said softly, placing the passport and boarding pass on his desk. "Your flight departs in 3 hours. He rubbed his temples. Anything else? She hesitated. Jacob's been arranging closed-door board meetings. Overnight, no agenda shared. Ethan's jaw tightened. Send me the security footage. He slipped a flash drive into his briefcase, a trove of evidence proving Foster's attempt to steal credit for Mindspan's latest AI breakthrough. Stepping out into the morning bustle of Riverbend International Airport. Ethan tightened his tie. Despite his first-class ticket and executive status, his heart pounded at the TSA checkpoint. The stern agent barely glanced at the white passenger ahead before dismissively waving him through. Then came Ethan's turn ID and boarding pass. The agent's gaze lingered, brow furrowing. Moore. Is that supposed to be Moore? He mispronounced the name deliberately, glancing for approval from a colleague. Ethan corrected him. It's Moore, like the poet. The agent nodded absently. Random additional screening. 2 more officers descended, rifling through his expensive briefcase as if hunting contraband. One held up his encrypted corporate drive. Need to scan for illicit tech? The man muttered. Ethan explained calmly. I'm CEO of Mindspan, en route to speak at the Global Innovation Summit. The agents exchanged skeptical looks. Sure you are. One sneered. 30 minutes later. Ethan finally reached gate A12 breath ragged. Just as the first-class doors opened, his phone buzzed Aisha Patel. Jacob called an emergency finance review for tomorrow. He's trying to access restricted accounts. Ethan pressed red as he joined the boarding queue. Immediately, a female attendant with a pinched expression blocked his path. Coach, boarding hasn't begun, she said without looking at his pass. He extended it. I'm in first class. She glanced at it dismissively. Wait here. Then she moved on to greet a trio of white executives with over-enthusiastic warmth. Ethan suppressed a sigh. Shoulders squared, this would be the fight of a lifetime. He followed her down the jet bridge, hearing her chatter about the champagne service she'd lavish on them. On board, she refused to hang his coat, then immediately whisked the next passenger's jacket into the closet. When he reached seat 2A, he noted the sudden hush. A woman across the aisle whispered to her husband, "First class is supposed to be exclusive." A burly businessman in 2B spat a disgusted mistake and called for confirmation of Ethan's ticket. Mr. Moore. The attendant's voice coated with fake apology. Then she turned away without fixing his coat. Beside him, Gavin Marshall settled in 2B, sipping a pre-departure scotch. Ethan recognized the logo on his briefcase, Williams Global Partners, a key investor who'd ghosted Mindspan meetings 3 times before. The irony stung. The cabin lights dimmed and the engines roared. Ethan closed his eyes, bracing for turbulence. He dared to hope that once airborne, he might find calm. Instead, he found war. When the meal service began, the captain's voice crackled, "Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy our gourmet offerings." Plates emerged, glittering with artistry for everyone except Ethan. Olivia Blake dropped his covered plate before him, then glided away. He lifted the lid and recoiled mold-spotted bread, meat black at the edges, a strange white powder dusting it all. He swallowed bile. "Excuse me," he called, voice low. "This is inedible." She rolled her eyes. "Your people eat anything, right? Maybe you should choose economy next time." Laughter rippled beside him. Gavin Marshall leaned over, inspecting the food with mock disgust. "If you're too picky, stick to your own flights." Ethan pressed record again, hands steady. Moments later, he bit into the bread. His tongue tingled, throat tightened an allergic reaction. Panic flared as he realized his EpiPen was missing. The TSA search. They must have taken it. His vision blurred, hives erupted on his arms. He pressed the call button over and over as his breath hissed through constricted lungs. Flight attendants passed him by until Sophie Ramirez intervened, ignoring Olivia Blake's orders. She administered the in-flight epinephrine, saving him from collapse. The cabin fell silent. Captain Henry Caldwell appeared, irritation flickering into concern when he saw Sophie's defiance. By the time the plane began its descent into Harbor Point International Airport, Ethan's phone had emailed his legal team, BCCing key board members, encrypting every recording and photo. He'd also slipped a note to Sophie. "They're paid to do this. I need witnesses." She nodded, eyes fierce. As the wheels touched ground, 2 airport officers and a suited man stepped aboard. They moved toward Ethan. "Come with us," one said. Before Ethan could respond, Dr. Emily Carter rose from her window seat, credentials in hand, and invoked federal regulations. Other passengers held up their phones, ready to testify. The officers paused, uncertain. The suited man's jaw clenched. Ethan Moore inhaled deeply. He had arrived in Hightower City on the brink of disaster and of his greatest triumph. Ethan Moore settled into his plush seat in the first-class cabin of Airline Flight AX310 Hart, still racing from the TSA ambush. Beside him, Gavin Marshall cleared his throat loudly. "My company, Williams Global Partners, spends millions with this airline every year," he announced to Olivia Blake, arms crossed atop the empty seat next to him. "I expect certain standards of service." As Ethan Moore tucked his briefcase beneath the seat, his eyes flicked to the silver and blue emblem on Gavin Marshall's leather portfolio. This was the parent firm of Next Gen Dynamics, the very investor who had ghosted him 3 times each no-show stalling crucial negotiations. The irony wasn't lost on Ethan. The man degrading him now held the power to greenlight or kill Mindspan's biggest deal. A soft chime sounded as the cabin lights dimmed. Over the intercom, Captain Henry Caldwell's warm baritone filled the cabin. "Good afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard. We're honored to have you with us today." Moments later, the cockpit door opened and Captain Henry Caldwell himself strode into view, pausing at each seat to greet the distinguished passengers. He reached Gavin Marshall first. "Gavin, always a pleasure." He beamed, clasping Gavin's hand. "How's the family all thriving?" Gavin replied, pride edging his voice. "My daughter just got into Harvard." The captain chuckled and proceeded down the aisle, offering similar pleasantries until he stood before Ethan Moore. His practiced smile stiffened into polite neutrality. Ethan extended his hand. The captain glanced past him without acknowledgement and moved on. The message was unmistakable. Ethan Moore didn't belong. Across the aisle, Helen Carlyle nursed her glass of champagne. The champagne arrived courtesy of Olivia Blake, who glided through the cabin, personally pouring flutes for every white passenger with an almost maternal attentiveness. When she reached Ethan Moore, her smile froze. "We're out of champagne," she announced brusquely. Ethan nodded. "Water would be fine. Thank you." A moment later, she returned with a glass of ice water, only to tilt it too far, drenching Ethan's open laptop and scattering his files across the tray table. "Oops." Olivia Blake shrugged without apology. "Be more careful where you put your things." "Nearby." Gavin Marshall laughed into his phone, loud enough for half the cabin to hear. These Asians and their computers, they take over everything. Ethan Moore pressed record, careful to capture every slide. He watched as Olivia Blake whispered to the crew, pointing at his seat. They all snickered, their eyes dancing with cruel anticipation. Only Sophie Ramirez, a trainee attendant standing off to the side, looked away in discomfort. Moments later, a late passenger was invited to sample the very champagne that had been declared out for Ethan, highlighting the absurdity of his exclusion. Yet the worst was still to come: meal service. "Ladies and gentlemen," Olivia Blake announced with misplaced elegance, "our executive chef has prepared tonight's gourmet entree." She unveiled a succulent salmon for Helen Carlyle, its flesh pink and glistening beside herb-roasted asparagus. At Gavin Marshall's place, a perfectly seared filet mignon arrived, steam wafting from the precise cut. Then she approached Ethan Moore and practically dropped his plate at his feet. "Your meal," she said flatly, pushing a covered silver platter toward him. Ethan lifted the lid and recoiled. The bread was dotted with green fuzz. The meat's once rich color had turned gray and slick. A strange white powder lay scattered across the surfaces. The stench was overpowering. "This isn't just substandard," Ethan Moore said, voice low. "It's dangerous." Olivia Blake arched an eyebrow. "Looks fine to me." She shrugged. Ethan pointed to the mold. "And the meat is rotten." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Your people eat anything. Right street markets, rice paddies, this should taste like a feast." Laughter rippled again. Gavin Marshall leaned across, sniffed the plate, and sneered, "Maybe economy. Next time Chinese airlines do better," keeping his composure. Ethan Moore discreetly photographed the plate in the galley beyond. Olivia Blake and two senior crew members whispered and pointed at his seat. Eager for a show, Sophie Ramirez watched from the shadows, jaw clenched. "I'm not eating this," Ethan stated firmly. "Could I have a replacement?" Olivia Blake's smile curdled. First the champagne, then the water spill. "Now you're ungrateful." She leaned in conspiratorially. "Call the captain if you want. He's been a headache since boarding." Gavin Marshall laughed again. Typical entitlement. Swallowing his frustration, Ethan Moore decided to test them. He tore off a small corner of the bread, hoping the discoloration was only surface level. Immediately, a sharp tingling spread across his tongue, prickling into his throat. His heart lurched. He reached under the seat for his carry-on, but his emergency medication kit was gone. Panic surged as hives rose on his wrists. His airway tightened. He pressed the call button repeatedly, vision blurring. Cabin lights flickered overhead. The cruelty of having his EpiPen removed likely during the TSA random search hit him with full force. As his breaths grew shallow, Sophie Ramirez rushed forward, defying Olivia Blake's glare. "He's having anaphylaxis," she declared, retrieving the onboard medical kit. Olivia Blake lunged to stop her until Captain Henry Caldwell appeared, concern cracking his stern facade. "Let her through," Captain Caldwell ordered quietly. Sophie Ramirez injected the epinephrine, and Ethan Moore slumped against the bulkhead as relief washed through his strained chest. Around him, smartphones emerged, passengers recording, watching. Ethan Moore met Sophie Ramirez's eyes. She gave the slightest nod of solidarity. In that instant, he knew this fight would extend far beyond this cabin. When Ethan Moore realized his EpiPen was missing, A cold dread washed over him. He distinctly remembered packing it that morning, as he did before every trip. Now, confronted with the tingling in his mouth and the first red welts blossoming on his wrist, he understood this wasn't mere negligence, it was attempted harm. The pieces snapped together like shards of broken glass. Olivia Blake's smirk when she delivered the spoiled meal, the TSA random search that had been far from random, and Gavin Marshall's mocking laughter as his phone screen flashed. Panic rose in Ethan's chest. His throat seized, every breath a battle. He pressed the overhead call button until the small lamp blinked urgently. Yet Olivia Blake continued chatting with passengers on the opposite aisle, completely ignoring his plight, his vision blurred at the edges. He raised his trembling hand and croaked, "I need medical assistance. I'm having an allergic reaction." Gavin Marshall clicked his tongue. "Oh, come on." He scoffed. "You took one bite, and now you're putting on a show." Ethan straightened his suit jacket despite the pressure around his neck. He pressed again, voice cracking. "Please, airborne emergency." The cabin lights seemed to flicker. Gavin leaned back, haughty. Someone should confiscate that button. He muttered, amusement lacing his words. The world tilted. Ethan Moore knew he couldn't wait any longer. He staggered to his feet, grasping the back of Olivia Blake's service cart for balance. The polished floor of Airline Flight AX310 felt as unstable as quicksand. Olivia Blake stepped swiftly into his path. "Sir, return to your seat immediately. Passengers aren't allowed aft." He choked out, "Can't breathe, need EpiPen." Her lips curled. "He's drunk and disorderly." She announced to anyone listening, "Exactly why we have air marshals." She turned to Leo Bennett, grinning triumphantly. "Alert the captain." Dark spots danced before Ethan's eyes as hives erupted across his throat and face. He gripped the service cart with both hands. Just as his knees buckled, a figure burst through the cluster of gleeful crew. Sophie Ramirez. Eyes blazing, she shoved Olivia Blake aside. "He's having anaphylaxis," she declared, voice firm. Olivia Blake snapped, "Return to your station, trainee." But Sophie Ramirez wouldn't be cowed. "Sir, where's your EpiPen?" she asked urgently. Ethan could only shake his head, each movement a victory over constriction. TSA removed it, he rasped. With deft fingers, Sophie Ramirez unlocked the onboard medical kit, revealing the emergency epinephrine injector. "Step back," she instructed, her tone professional and calm. In one fluid motion, she pressed the injector into Ethan Moore's thigh through his slacks. He slumped against the bulkhead, chest heaving as relief coursed through his lungs. Moments later, Captain Henry Caldwell emerged from the cockpit, brow furrowed with concern rather than annoyance. "What's happening?" he demanded of Olivia Blake, who tried to brush him aside. He had a minor episode. Olivia Blake lied. The trainee overreacted. Sophie Ramirez stepped forward. He experienced anaphylaxis after consuming contaminated food. Standard emergency protocol followed. Captain Caldwell's jaw clenched. "Document this properly," he ordered, voice low but firm. Then he turned to the frightened onlookers. "Ladies and gentlemen, a minor medical incident, but all is now under control. Please return to your seats and enjoy the remainder of the flight." As Ethan Moore returned to his seat, shakily collecting his computer and documents, he became aware of glances from across the cabin. Several passengers discreetly showed him they had recorded the refusal of assistance and Olivia Blake's initial cruelty. In hushed tones, They confirmed what he feared: this had been no accident. The line between prejudice and premeditation had been crossed. At the rear, Leo Bennett muttered to Olivia Blake. "How do we document this?" Captain Caldwell replied curtly. Passenger became ill after meal service. No mention of food contamination or delayed response. Standard form, no incident report necessary. Meanwhile, Gavin Marshall whipped out his phone and typed a swift message. "Minor allergy scare handled before NY meeting. Delay tactics effective, will update after landing." Ethan caught the screen's glow and knew the conspiracy was deeper than random racism. It was corporate sabotage. As his breathing steadied, Ethan Moore pressed record on his phone one more time, capturing Gavin Marshall's admission. This flight was no isolated act of cruelty. It was the opening salvo in a war for his career and his company's future. With the epinephrine still humming through his veins, Ethan quietly tweeted to his legal team, attaching time-stamped videos of the contaminated meal, the denied assistance, and Gavin Marshall's damning text. He BCC'd Natalie Kim and Chloe Davis, requesting immediate action upon landing. His mind raced. He had proof, witnesses, and allies. The battle had only just begun. High above the Atlantic, Ethan Moore hunched over his laptop, eyes darting across online financial bulletins 3 weeks earlier. Next Gen Dynamics had quietly boosted its takeover bid for Mindspan Technologies, only to be rebuffed each time by a board still loyal to Ethan Moore. Now, as the shimmering skyline of Hightower City drew closer, he realized the timing of this orchestrated flight drama was more than coincidence. This mid-air humiliation was engineered to knock him out of the upcoming Global Innovation Summit, making Mindspan vulnerable to purchase at a bargain. He scrolled further, heart pounding. Then he found a grainy photo from an alumni gala at Lakeshore Business School, showing Gavin Marshall and Jacob Foster arm in arm, grinning like cronies. The caption confirmed a decades-long friendship proof that his undermining VP and the ruthless investor were in league. Betrayal's sting cut deeper than any slight he'd suffered in the cabin. A ping interrupted him. Aisha Patel had sent the security footage. He clicked the link. The timestamp read 2:14 a.m., long after hours. There was Jacob Foster creeping into the server room where Mindspan's crown jewel AI algorithm slept on a protected drive. Ethan Moore exhaled. Gavin Marshall's absence from his seat made sense now he'd slipped away to orchestrate this sabotage. Moments later, Gavin Marshall returned, phone in hand, and dropped it casually onto the armrest. The screen glowed with an open chat. Is he out of commission yet? Ethan Moore felt a cold fury. He twisted in his seat and glanced down. His pulse thundered as he read the reply. Almost. Won't make the summit. The two had plotted not merely to humiliate him, but to incapacitate him long enough for Jacob Foster to call an emergency board vote at 9 July, the next day without Ethan there to veto the hostile takeover. Gavin Marshall caught Ethan Moore's stare and snapped his phone shut. Spying. Are we? He hissed, snatching the device across his lap. Ethan held his ground. This is corporate espionage the same. You're running with your buddy Jacob, he countered quietly. Gavin's lips curled into a sneer. Prove it. More. Your word against mine. By the time this plane lands, Mindspan will be under new management. Gavin Marshall threatened. Voice low. Jacob has arranged everything. He pressed his call button and Olivia Blake appeared in an instant. Gavin pointed at Ethan. "He's trying to steal confidential data." Olivia Blake nodded coldly. "I'll inform the captain." Within minutes, Captain Henry Caldwell stepped into the cabin. Eyes narrowed. "Mr. Moore," he said curtly, ignoring the enraged investor, "you must come with me upon landing." "On what grounds?" Ethan Moore asked. Voice calm. "Interfering with cabin operations and corporate espionage." Captain Caldwell listed off mechanically. The gravity of his situation settled like a weight in Ethan's chest. They had conspired to remove him through humiliation, attempted poisoning, and now false charges so Jacob Foster could seize control in his absence. With 3 hours until touchdown, Ethan Moore marshaled his strategic mind. He first encrypted and emailed every piece of incriminating evidence photos of the contaminated meal. The crew's refusal of aid, recordings of Gavin Marshall's threats, and the security footage of Jacob Foster's midnight raid to his legal team and 5 trusted directors. He blind copied his personal attorney with instructions to secure an emergency injunction against any board meeting. Next, he sought allies. Looking toward the galley, he caught Sophie Ramirez's eye. She discreetly passed him a napkin when delivering a glass of water. On it, in neat handwriting, I saw, "They were paid. I can help." Ethan Moore scribbled quickly on the edge, "Need witness statements," discreetly. Sophie Ramirez nodded as she collected the empty glass, her courage a small but vital beacon. Then, Ethan overheard 2 senior attendants whispering about their bonus. 500 each, just treat one passenger like garbage. One confided. The casual cruelty ignited something in Ethan, a memory of similar incidents reported by other executives. He tapped back into the Wi-Fi and searched Asian CEO delayed flight discrimination takeover. Several buried articles surfaced, recounting uncanny parallels, execs derailed before major mergers, only for their companies to be swallowed quickly afterward. In 3 of those cases, Gavin Marshall's presence on the flight logs was no accident. He emailed his team research pattern corporate discrimination before hostile takeovers, possible RICO. Another ping, "Doctor." Emily Carter had replied. A clip showed Gavin Marshall slipping an envelope, likely cash, into Captain Henry Caldwell's pocket in the airport parking lot before departure. The damning footage downloaded slowly but surely over the aircraft's Wi-Fi. As Ethan Moore leaned back, his phone buzzed again. A woman in the row ahead caught his glance and offered him a business card. Dr. Emily Carter, attorney and civil rights advocate. She mouthed, "We have a case." Her eyes shone with determined solidarity. Ethan Moore closed his laptop. The cabin lights dimmed for descent. He tucked the card safely into his jacket. The conspirators had underestimated one thing, his resolve. Touchdown in Hightower City would mark not just a landing, but a turning point. Ethan Moore braced himself for the race ahead to confront false charges, halt the takeover, and expose a scheme that weaponized prejudice for profit. As the skyscrapers came into view, he felt a surge of calm certainty they had plotted against him. But he held the truth, and that truth would win. Dr. Emily Carter watched from a few rows ahead as Ethan Moore discreetly examined the envelope in Gavin Marshall's hand. Their eyes locked, and she slipped him a crisp business card, her name, credentials in international human rights law, and a personal cell number penned on the back. During a rare lull in service, Ethan Moore approached her in the aisle. "I've witnessed everything," Dr. Emily Carter whispered, voice low. "This is a clear civil rights violation. I serve on the board of the Airline Passengers' Rights Association. I can testify." She pressed her card into his hand. "Call me when we land. I'll help you file charges," before Ethan could thank her. Olivia Blake stormed over. "Return to your seat immediately." She barked at Ethan Moore, then turned on Dr. Emily Carter. "And you stay in your assigned section." "I was simply returning from the lavatory." Dr. Emily Carter replied calmly. Olivia Blake grabbed her arm. "You'll be moved to another section for the remainder of the flight." She dragged Dr. Emily Carter away despite her protests. Gavin Marshall leaned close to Ethan Moore. Tone low. "Making friends won't help you. My security team will meet you at the gate. You'll be lucky if you make your meeting next week." Ethan barely heard him. His mind raced, assembling the pieces of a counter-strategy. Despite their power, money, and connections, they had underestimated his capacity for evidence and strategy. The seatbelt light flickered off as Captain Henry Caldwell's voice sounded in the cabin. "We are beginning our initial descent into Hightower City. Please ensure your devices are set to airplane mode, with less than an hour until landing." Ethan Moore sprang into action. First, he needed to safeguard his evidence. On his laptop, he connected through an encrypted VPN to Mindspan's secure server. "They think of me as just a tech guy," he thought. "Let's use that to our advantage." He sent urgent, time-stamped files to his 3 most trusted board members-directors who had resisted Jacob Foster's influence. Attached were the dashcam footage of Gavin Marshall bribing Captain Henry Caldwell, the medical logs from his allergic reaction, and the recordings of discriminatory comments. The subject line read, "Emergency corporate sabotage and civil rights violations." Next, he contacted Grace Mitchell at the FBI's Corporate Espionage Division, a longtime collaborator. His message, possible attempt to sabotage American tech company via corporate espionage and physical endangerment of CEO, evidence involving cross-state actors, requesting agent at Harbor Point International Airport, Gate 32B, Flight AX310, as external support mobilized. Ethan Moore took his boldest step yet. He flipped his phone camera to selfie mode, ensuring Gavin Marshall remained in frame, and began a live stream to Mindspan's executive Slack channel. "This is Ethan Moore, CEO of Mindspan Technologies, on Flight AX310 to Hightower City. I have been subjected to coordinated discrimination, deliberate food contamination that triggered anaphylaxis, and now threats of detention upon landing. The man beside me is Gavin Marshall, Chief Strategy Officer of Williams Global Partners, orchestrating with my VP, Jacob Foster, to remove me from tomorrow's board vote." A hush fell over first class. Gavin Marshall lunged for the phone. "What are you doing?" he snarled. Ethan calmly held his ground. "Live streaming to my board and legal team." Gavin tore at the device. "Give that back." Ethan pressed record harder. "You people need to learn your place." Gavin Marshall erupted, voice ringing through the cabin. "You're not welcome in these boardrooms." Several passengers recoiled. Some raised their own phones in solidarity. Over the intercom, Captain Henry Caldwell barked, "Please, power down all electronics." Ethan ignored him. "I am documenting a civil rights violation and attempted corporate espionage," he replied evenly. "Under FAA regulations, I have the right to record ongoing criminal activity for my protection." Moments later, Dr. Emily Carter returned to first class despite her relocation, stepping confidently beside Ethan Moore. "He's within his rights," she declared, brandishing her credentials. Federal law permits this recording. The captain's face blanched, but he did not interrupt. By now, the live stream had reached over 3,000 viewers, including financial journalists tracking Mindspan's social accounts. The cabin was deathly silent. Gavin Marshall made one last desperate offer. Voice low, end the stream. I'll arrange a 10% bump for Next Gen's bid walk away now, and we both benefit. Ethan Moore pivoted the camera to capture Gavin's words. Your bid won't silence this, he said. This isn't just about money, it's about exposing a pattern of corruption. As the wheels touched down at Harbor Point International Airport, a final threat lingered in Gavin Marshall's glare. His security team and the captain would move to seize Ethan Moore's phone and detain him, all to buy time for Jacob Foster's takeover. But Ethan Moore felt no fear, only the steady certainty that truth, evidence, and collective witness would win the day. With the stream still live, he prepared to disembark into the battle that awaited. The cabin lights brightened as Airline Flight AX310 taxied to a hesitant halt at Gate B12. Ethan Moore paused his live stream and slipped his phone into his jacket pocket, heart hammering as he peered through the oval window. Two uniformed security officers approached the open doorway, flanked by a sharply dressed man whose suit matched the silhouette Gavin Marshall had described. Remain seated, please. Captain Henry Caldwell's voice echoed over the intercom. Security will be aboard momentarily. At the bottom of the stairs, the officers boarded. Olivia Blake strode forward, finger pointing directly at Ethan Moore. There, she declared, voice loud enough that half the cabin turned to stare. He's been disruptive, threatening crew and refusing protocols. One officer inclined his head, voice clipped, Sir, we need you to collect your belongings and follow us. Ethan Moore rose, calm veneer cracking for only a breath. On what grounds, he asked. Voice steady. This is not an arrest. The taller officer replied, We need information regarding your conduct. From behind them, Gavin Marshall called out, I'll provide a full witness statement. His smug grin drew murmurs of disapproval from passengers. Before Ethan could comply, a clear voice rang out, Excuse me, officers. Dr. Emily Carter stepped into the aisle, credentials in hand. I'm Dr. Emily Carter, attorney and board member of the Airline Passengers' Rights Association. I witnessed everything. She motioned to a cluster of seatmates, many now holding up their phones in silent solidarity. At least a dozen passengers recorded the deliberate food contamination, the refusal to assist during his allergic reaction, and the discriminatory treatment throughout. Olivia Blake interjected, We provided medical aid after initial reluctance. That's precisely the retaliation against a whistleblower, Sophie Ramirez added, stepping beside Dr. Emily Carter. I administered the epinephrine. He was endangered by intentional neglect. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. Captain Caldwell appeared in the aisle, face pale. This is serious, he admitted. A corridor opened as Natalie Kim, Mindspan's chief legal counsel, emerged from the jet bridge, flanked by security. She raised a hand to halt the officers. There will be no detention, she declared. We have live evidence, witness testimony, and legal representation. At that moment, Grace Mitchell's alert buzzed in Ethan's jacket, a federal agent assigned to meet him. He caught Gavin Marshall's eye. The investor's face twisted in fury as reality set in. Down on the terminal floor, cameras blinked to life. News crews surged forward as Ethan Moore stepped onto the jet bridge, flanked by Natalie Kim and legal aides. Reporters shouted questions. Is it true you were targeted for discrimination? Will you press charges? Natalie Kim ushered Ethan into a private lounge inside. She briefed him at rapid pace. Jacob Foster called an emergency board meeting for 4 o'clock, claiming you had a meltdown in flight. He's drafted a press release alleging health concerns and announced himself interim CEO. He's also prepared a merger agreement with NextGen, pending your absence. Ethan checked his watch. 32 p.m. How many votes does he have? 3 board members are on his side, Natalie Kim replied. 2 are firmly with you. The rest are undecided. She slid him a tablet. On it, the draft press release bore Jacob Foster's signature. He's moving fast, she warned. Ethan Moore exhaled and straightened his shoulders. Then we'll move faster. He tapped his phone. Notify the board do not convene until I arrive in person. Injunction filings in progress, as the security detail formed a protective escort. Ethan Moore prepared to race through Hightower City traffic to Mindspan's Summit Towers. In his hand, he still gripped Dr. Emily Carter's card, a reminder that courage, solidarity, and truth had already turned the tide. Ethan Moore scanned the documents on the tablet Natalie Kim had handed him. Jacob Foster was moving faster than expected. The emergency board meeting had been called at 4 o'clock sharp in the executive suite at Summit Towers, nestled just off Majestic Avenue. Traffic snarled through downtown Hightower City. Thanks to a spontaneous parade blocking several avenues, we don't have a minute to lose, Ethan said, straightening his jacket. Outside the lounge, he spotted Gavin Marshall slipping through a private exit, flanked by 2 burly security operatives. Their eyes met briefly, Gavin's filled with cold fury, Ethan's with unwavering resolve. The ride to Summit Towers was a blur of brake lights and honking horns. About halfway there, Ethan's phone pinged with a market alert NextGen's PR team had quietly leaked the impending takeover to key financial journalists. Mindspan's stock plunged nearly 18% in minutes. He muttered under his breath. They're engineering a self-fulfilling prophecy driving down value so the board folds under pressure. As the car crept into the building's driveway, a group of suited men Gavin Marshall's associates stood guard at the revolving door. Claiming concern for shareholder stability, they barraged arriving employees with frantic questions about the CEO's mental state. NYPD officers eventually intervened, clearing a path for Ethan Moore and his security detail. They raced to the 23rd floor, where the boardroom doors loomed closed and Jacob Foster's assistant stood like a sentinel. "I'm sorry, Mr. Moore," she said without meeting his eyes. "The meeting is closed, Mr. Foster instructed no interruptions. Ethan Moore nodded politely. "I'm still the CEO," he stated firmly. The doors swung open, and he strode in alongside Natalie Kim and 2 of Mindspan's legal counsels. Inside, Jacob Foster was mid-presentation, clicking through carefully edited clips from Ethan Moore's flight. The footage showed Ethan appearing agitated, no mention of the contaminated meal, the racial slurs, or the near-fatal allergic reaction. "As you can see," Jacob intoned smoothly, "Ethan Moore's behavior has become erratic. The board must consider a temporary leadership change." At that moment, Ethan Moore connected his phone to the room's AV system. "Let me share the complete footage," he said quietly. Over the next 20 minutes, the board watched in stunned silence as the unabridged evidence played the deliberate food sabotage. the attendant's cruelty, Gavin Marshall's incriminating texts, and Jacob Foster's midnight server room incursion. When the final clip faded, showing Gavin Marshall slipping a cash-filled envelope to Captain Henry Caldwell, the lead director exhaled, voice trembling. "This is disturbing." Jacob Foster lunged for the controls. Manipulated. "This is defamation," he shouted. Security quietly restrained him as Ethan Moore observed calmly. "Every second of this is being transmitted live to our shareholders, the SEC, and the FBI's Corporate Espionage Division." Jacob Foster's face contorted with rage. "You'll never be one of us," he screamed. "You should have stayed in the lab where your kind belongs." His outburst confirmed the bias fueling the conspiracy. Security escorted Jacob Foster from the room. The directors exchanged uneasy glances, still absorbing the full scope of the betrayal. Ethan Moore cleared his throat. "We have 2 votes first, on your recommendation for my removal. Second, on NextGen's acquisition offer." He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. "All those in favor of my removal." There was silence. Then a hesitant director raised a hand, just one. Opposed. Every other hand shot up in unison. NextGen's offer. The vote was unanimously against. A collective exhale filled the room as the board chair said quietly, "The motion fails on both counts. Mr. Moore remains CEO, and the takeover is off the table." 1 week later, Ethan Moore sat in his Riverbend city office, reviewing Skyward Air's boilerplate response to his complaint. The letter acknowledged service issues but denied any systemic bias, offering 50,000 bonus miles in goodwill. Ethan set the letter beside a stack of similar apologies he'd received throughout his career, acknowledgments of discomfort without accountability. Natalie Kim entered, tablet in hand. "Captain Henry Caldwell and Olivia Blake are on administrative leave pending investigation," she reported. "That's a temporary measure. They'll likely return once the headlines fade." Ethan nodded. "And the criminal charges." She sighed. "Skyward's legal team is contesting deliberate contamination, arguing your treatment was miscommunication. They're also painting Sophie Ramirez as a rogue trainee. Her job is in jeopardy." He closed his eyes, expecting nothing less, and Gavin Marshall Williams Global Partners has disavowed him, claiming any misconduct was unauthorized. He's been placed on leave, but he'll probably resurface elsewhere. Jacob Foster, NextGen, hired him as a consultant, stock options far surpassing his Mindspan pay. They're rewarding him for engineering the takeover attempt. Ethan walked to the window, gazing at the Hightower City skyline. He whispered, "This wasn't an isolated incident. It's a pattern." Over the following days, Ethan Moore went public. He published a detailed account, complete with videos. Boycott Skyward Air trended internationally. Skyward's stock plummeted 12% in 3 days. Then came the testimonies. Brandon Lee, CEO of Quantum Solutions, shared airport detention footage. Dr. Maya Shah, CFO of Biogenics, revealed coffee spill sabotage before an investor pitch. As more executives came forward, the scandal burgeoned into a class action lawsuit against multiple airlines, Williams Global Partners, and NextGen Dynamics alleging racketeering, corporate espionage, and civil rights violations. Industry titans scrambled to deflect blame, offering performative diversity training while quietly instructing staff on damage control. Yet the tide had turned. Shareholders and regulators demanded transparency. 6 months after that fateful flight, Ethan Moore stood at the podium of the Global Tech Leadership Conference in Landmark Chateau, the same marquee event he had almost missed. He spoke to a packed, diverse audience. That meal was meant to poison one man's career. Instead, it sparked an awakening. Systems entrenched in prejudice were laid bare. True change demands evidence, courage, and collective action. Today, I launched the Equitable Innovation Fund, $50 million to support visionaries of color navigating these obstacles. Because innovation thrives when everyone has a seat at the table, the crowd rose in thunderous ovation. In the front row sat Sophie Ramirez, newly appointed Director of Corporate Ethics, and Dr. Emily Carter, whose testimony had been pivotal. As applause reverberated, Ethan Moore allowed himself a quiet smile. The fight was far from over, but for once, justice had taken flight. Sophie Ramirez sat stiffly in Ethan Moore's corner office at Summit Towers, fresh from her termination email. Yet her resolve was unshaken. As a key whistleblower, she had furnished internal crew chat logs revealing that flight attendants on certain flights received special cash incentives when transporting flagged passengers. Those revelations had galvanized the new class action suit assembled by Dr. Emily Carter, who had connected Ethan with civil rights organizations and galvanizing legal minds nationwide. The lawsuit named not only Skyward Air, but 3 other major carriers: Williams Global Partners and NextGen Dynamics, alleging a decades-long conspiracy to employ racial discrimination as a tool for corporate sabotage. The airline's initial reaction was predictable grand announcements of new diversity training initiatives, even as internal memos circulated cautioning staff how to document any complaints in the blandest, least incriminating terms. Across the city, Williams Global Partners staged a public relations coup, hiring a prominent Asian American executive as their chief diversity officer. Yet employees whispered the role carried zero authority. Meanwhile, financial analysts pounced on Mindspan's turbulent stock forecasts were downgraded, and op-eds questioned Ethan Moore's leadership, accusing him of playing the race card to distract from business headwinds. Jacob Foster appeared on CNBC that evening, describing Ethan as erratic and paranoid. In Washington, the FAA and Department of Transportation opened inquiries but cautioned that formal findings might take 12 to 18 months, a timeline guaranteed to let public interest wane. Yet the story refused to fade. Internal leaks from Skyward's own staff revealed years of complaints that senior executives had quietly buried. Word spread among industry insiders Gavin Marshall had appeared on previous flights carrying prospective takeover targets. And each time, executives of color reported sudden delays, detentions, or medical crises. The class action roster swelled to 28 plaintiffs, each sharing eerily similar stories. Brandon Lee, CEO of Quantum Solutions, recounted being held in a sterile screening room for 2 hours before a pivotal merger pitch. Dr. Maya Shah, CFO of Biogenics, produced video of a flight attendant dramatically spilling coffee on her investor presentation minutes before landing. As the weeks turned into months, the litigation ballooned into a reckoning for corporate America. 6 months after that fateful flight, Ethan Moore stood before the packed grand ballroom of the Landmark Chateau, ironically the same conference originally slated to host his Global Innovation Summit keynote. 6 months ago, he began, voice steady. I boarded a flight expecting safe passage to a meeting, but discovered that prejudice had been weaponized for profit. The audience, far more diverse than previous years, leaned forward. Screens behind him displayed a timeline: the contaminated meal, the medical emergency, the boardroom showdown, the class action filings, and finally, last week's landmark settlement of $142 million. He clicked to the next slide, a bulleted list of concrete reforms, court-monitored inclusion programs, transparent complaint procedures, and independent oversight boards with real authority. Accountability does not end with financial penalties. Ethan stressed. It demands fundamental changes to power structures. In the back row, Sophie Ramirez and Dr. Emily Carter exchanged proud smiles. The slide shifted to show a screenshot of Flight Watch, Mindspan's new free app developed in partnership with civil rights groups and airline unions, allowing passengers to document discriminatory incidents in real time, with automatic secure backups. Technology, Ethan Moore continued, can reinforce barriers or dismantle them. The choice is ours. The final slide split-screened the mold-ridden bread that ignited the crisis, and today's front-page banner, Skyward Air, announces historic leadership overhaul. First Asian American CEO takes helm. The room erupted in applause that swelled into a standing ovation. As the cheers rose, Ethan allowed himself a moment of quiet triumph. Williams' global partners now faced a federal racketeering indictment. Gavin Marshall personally confronted criminal charges. Jacob Foster had been forced from NextGen and named a co-defendant. Captain Henry Caldwell and Olivia Blake lost their aviation licenses. Nearly every architect of the conspiracy now felt the weight of accountability. Yet Ethan knew the journey was far from over. Through strategic financial maneuvers, Mindspan had acquired controlling interest in Skyward Air during its post-scandal devaluation. Next time I board a first-class cabin, Ethan had joked privately with his team, I'll own the plane. He closed his remarks with a vow. True leadership is not just running a successful company. It's creating systems that allow everyone to thrive on merit, not privilege. Today, we launch the Equitable Innovation Fund, $50 million, to support entrepreneurs of color navigating these very barriers. Amid the thunderous applause, Ethan Moore spotted Sophie Ramirez, now Mindspan's Director of Corporate Ethics, and Dr. Emily Carter, beaming at the front rows. The legacy of that flight stretched far beyond one CEO's ordeal. It reshaped an industry as the ovation peaked. Ethan reflected on the final twist nobody knew in a decisive merger. Mindspan had quietly taken full control of Skyward Air. He leaned forward, eyes glinting. The next time I fly first class, he told his team afterward, I'll be the one who owns the sky. The months that followed the landmark conference in the landmark Chateau's grand ballroom were nothing short of transformative for Ethan Moore, for Mindspan Technologies, and for the entire corporate landscape nationwide. Yet, as he sat in his corner office at Summit Towers, overlooking the sunlit avenues of Hightower City, he knew the work was far from over. It began quietly, with a ripple of accounts from executives of color across industries. Sophie Ramirez had become Mindspan's Director of Corporate Ethics, spearheading investigations into discriminatory practices within dozens of airlines. Meanwhile, Dr. Emily Carter organized weekly strategy sessions with civil rights leaders and legal experts, refining the class action suit that now represented 32 plaintiffs. They convened one crisp morning in a glass conference room, sunlight reflecting off the polished table. Ethan Moore tapped a fresh slide onto the screen. Legacy of the Skyward Incident. Beside him, Natalie Kim reviewed the latest draft of the Equitable Innovation White Paper. Across the table, Sophie Ramirez scrolled through a series of internal memos leaked from several carriers, each one more damning than the last. Discrimination hasn't vanished from corporate America or transportation. Ethan began. But systems that once thrived in the shadows now stand exposed. He clicked to the next slide, showing a bar graph percentage declines in discriminatory incident reports over the past 6 months, correlated with implementation of Flight Watch and court-mandated reforms. Sophie Ramirez leaned forward. Because of our actions, more passengers feel empowered to speak up. They know they won't be ignored. She pointed to a cluster of data, a 250% increase in validated discrimination complaints on major carriers, now funneled through public watchdog portals and regulatory bodies. Dr. Emily Carter chimed in. The class action suit isn't just about damages. It's a catalyst for systemic overhaul, transparent complaint channels, independent review boards, and whistleblower protections. She toggled to a slide summarizing the $142 million settlement and the structural requirements imposed on the airlines. This framework is a blueprint for any sector grappling with bias. Outside the window, the city's skyline shimmered with progress. Mindspan's headquarters now house the Equitable Innovation Fund's offices, where entrepreneurs of color received grants, legal support, and mentorship. Dozens of startups that might never have seen capital line the hallways, each carrying a piece of Ethan's vision that merit and not privilege would determine success. In the months since the settlement, 3 former conspirators faced criminal trials. Gavin Marshall stood indicted for racketeering and attempted corporate sabotage. Jacob Foster was named a co-defendant for civil rights violations and corporate espionage, and Captain Henry Caldwell had lost his aviation license permanently, cited for accepting bribes and endangering a passenger's life. Yet Ethan understood that punishing individuals was only one step. Real change, he told his team, means altering incentives at every level. That belief led to Mindspan's new initiative, Flight Watch's Integration API, partnering with 2 major carriers. Flight Watch embedded a secure complaint button into in-flight entertainment systems, allowing real-time reporting, audio logs, and video uploads directly to regulators. The effect was immediate. Within weeks, several crew trainers were replaced. New diversity and inclusion directorates were staffed with individuals possessing genuine authority, and airlines revamped employee compensation models to eliminate perverse bonuses tied to passenger treatment. A breathing pause followed years of unchecked bias. Across corporate boardrooms, conversations shifted. Some CEOs, once skeptical, now invited Ethan Moore to speak privately about equitable governance. At one round table, a Fortune 50 chair confessed, "I never realized how widespread these practices were. Your story forced us to confront our own blind spots." As the first anniversary of the Skyward incident approached, Ethan prepared another keynote, this time for the Global Ethics Summit at the landmark Chateau. He reviewed his speech in a quiet moments before rehearsal, fingers tracing the edges of his notes. The core message remained unchanged: no one event, no single person, but a collective stand for justice. On the day of the summit, the grand ballroom was filled once more with leaders, activists, and innovators. Cameras awaited as Ethan Moore stepped onto the stage. Sophie Ramirez and Dr. Emily Carter sat in the front row, faces illuminated with pride. The audience, more diverse than ever, leaned forward. Discrimination, Ethan began, is not merely prejudice in action. It can be weaponized, meticulously planned to derail careers and consolidate power. But I stand before you, proof that evidence, courage, and collective action can dismantle even the most entrenched systems. He clicked to a montage, grainy photos of moldy bread, screenshots of hateful texts, the video of Gavin Marshall's outburst, and the faces of the 28 plaintiffs whose voices had broken the cycle. He paused over a clean slide, a black and white image of Flight Watch's interface. Captioned, "No incident disappears. This platform," Ethan explained, "ensures accountability in real time. It transforms passengers into guardians of justice and companies into transparent institutions." The room erupted in sustained applause. As he stepped back, Natalie Kim joined him on stage. Together, they unveiled a new report, Corporate Accountability 2025, co-published with the Department of Transportation and leading civil rights NGOs. The landmark study detailed not only airline reforms but best practices for financial services, healthcare, and technology sectors where similar abuses had lurked unchecked. After the ceremony, Ethan mingled with attendees. A VP from a global bank confided, "We've begun auditing our own policies. Your fight exposed our vulnerabilities." A tech founder thanked him, tears in her eyes. "Because of this movement, our startup secured seed funding it otherwise wouldn't have." That evening, as Ethan Moore returned to his office, he reflected on the journey that had begun with a single tray of tainted food. In the months since, his company had evolved, the industry had shifted, and countless individuals had found their voices. He looked across the skyline, lights twinkling like beacons of change. Though discrimination remained a threat, the tools and will to combat it had taken root. He tapped a final entry into his journal. True victory lies not in punishment, but in forging systems that preempt injustice. One person's stand can spark a movement, but together our collective action reshapes the world. Ethan Moore closed his journal, eyes bright with determination. The work ahead would be measured not in victories alone, but in the enduring impact of accountability, transparency, and shared humanity. He turned off the lights and left the office, ready for the next chapter in the fight for equitable innovation. From the moment Ethan Moore pressed record on his phone, he changed the course of corporate history. This isn't just the story of a CEO who refused to be silenced. It's a testament to the power of evidence, solidarity, and relentless determination. As we watched flight attendants turn from bystanders to whistleblowers, board members unite against injustice, and a single app empower countless passengers, we've seen how one person's stand can ignite systemic change. What began with a tainted meal became the catalyst for a $142 million settlement, sweeping industry reforms, and the launch of initiatives to protect executives of color everywhere. But the true legacy goes beyond numbers. It lives in every individual who chooses to document abuse, speak truth to power, and refuse to tolerate bias. If this journey moved you, help others discover it. Give this video a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe for more powerful stories that expose injustice and champion courage. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice can spark the next revolution.